to Warhammer 40k 8th edition, Battle Report 10, Chaos Demons of Khorne versus Tzeentch. 1850 points, battle forged, matched play, chapter approved. This will be the chapter approved Maelstrom of War mission Targets of Opportunity, and this will be Battle Report 5 within Group 4. We will be rolling for a random deployment map today, and we'll start by doing a quick lap around the table to see how the terrain has been placed. Starting with the last 2 foot by 2 foot section and going back around in the opposite direction, we will take a look at where the objectives have been placed. So here's objective marker 5, objective marker 1, objective marker 6, objective marker 3, objective marker 2, and finally objective marker 4. Before we roll for anything else, we need to roll for how many extra command points the Tzeentch army will have this battle. This is the dice that we will be rolling today. The symbol will be the 6, and here's the 1 just for reference. So plus D3 command points, getting an additional 2 command points for a total of 8 on the Tzeentch side, and the Chaos Demons of Khorne, of course, have 7. So first and foremost, we'll be rolling for which standard deployment map the armies will be playing on today. And here's the dice roll for that, getting a 5, which is frontline assault. On a 1, 2, or a 3, the Chaos Demons of Khorne will deploy on the left, and the Tzeentch army will deploy on the right. On a 4, 5, or 6, they will deploy on the opposite sides. And so here's the dice roll, getting a 4, so they will deploy on the opposite sides. On a 1, 2, or a 3, the Chaos Demons of Khorne will begin deploying first. On a 4, 5, or 6, Tzeentch will begin deploying first. And rolling a 2, so the Chaos Demons of Khorne will begin deploying first. We will be back after the deployment. So now that the deployment is finished, we'll take a quick look at where both armies finished setting up their models. Chaos Demons of Khorne did begin setting up first. However, Tzeentch finished setting up their deployment first, and so they will go first unless the Chaos Demons of Khorne are able to seize the initiative. And so on the Tzeentch side, we have a Soul Grinder of Tzeentch, the first squad of Pink Horrors, the second Soul Grinder of Tzeentch, the Lord of Change with Baleful Sword and the Impossible Robe, the second squad of Pink Horrors. This one is the squad that has the instrument and the demonic icon, Magnus the Red, the Warlord Kairos Fateweaver, and the third squad of Pink Horrors. Over on the Chaos Demons of Khorne side, we have the first squad of Bloodletters, the first Skull Cannon, Bloodthirster of Insensate Rage number 1, Scarbrand, Bloodthirster of Insensate Rage number 2, the second Skull Cannon, the second squad of Bloodletters, the Demon Prince of Khorne with Skull Reaver, the third squad of Bloodletters, the third Skull Cannon, and finally the squad of Fleshhounds. And so on a 6, the Chaos Demons of Khorne will seize the initiative, and they fail to seize. So let's go into Tzeentch turn 1. Going into Tzeentch turn 1, a reminder that Tzeentch has 8 command points, and the Chaos Demons of Khorne have 7 command points. Since this is the Maelstrom of War mission Targets of Opportunity, they need to draw 3 tactical objective cards, and they draw Secure Objective 3, score 1 victory point if you control Objective Marker 3 at the end of your turn. And Objective Marker 3 is this one right here, just on the other side of this ruin from these Pink Horrors. Tzeentch also drew Kingslayer, score D3 victory points if your opponent's Warlord has been destroyed during this or any previous turn. And finally, Supremacy, score D3 victory points if you control any 3 objective markers at the end of your turn. So going into the movement phase for Tzeentch turn 1, this Soul Grinder is going to move up the board 8 inches. And the Soul Grinder of Tzeentch will finish its movement right here. Next, this squad of Pink Horrors is going to move 6 inches up the board towards Objective Marker 3, and they will also declare an advance. And here's their advance roll, getting an extra 3 inches, for 9 inches of total movement. And the Pink Horrors will finish their movement here. They did not move up their full 9 inches that they could have. I just wanted to make sure that they had enough movement distance to be able to get around this ruin. to get up to objective marker 3. Now this Soul Grinder of Tzeentch is going to move up the board 8 inches, and it will finish its movement here. This Lord of Change is now going to move up the board 12 inches, and the Lord of Change will finish its movement here. Next, Magnus the Red is going to move up to 16 inches over to here, and Magnus the Red will finish his movement right here. Next, these pink horrors are going to move up the board 6 inches. And these pink horrors will finish their movement right here, and they are definitely within 3 inches of the center of objective marker 2. Kairos Fateweaver is going to move up the board up to 12 inches. And Kairos Fateweaver will end up here. He is just within 3 inches of the center of objective marker 4, so he is controlling that. And finally, this squad of pink horrors is going to move up the board 6 inches, and they will also declare an advance. And so here's the advance roll, getting an additional 4 inches for 10 inches of total possible movement. And so these pink horrors are going to end up here, and they are also within 3 inches of the center of objective marker 4. So at the start of the Tzeentch Psychic phase, Tzeentch is going to use the stratagem Locus of Conjuration, which is 2 command points. So they will go from 8 command points down to 6. Use this stratagem at the start of your Psychic phase. Select a Tzeentch Demon character from your army until the end of the phase. You can reroll any failed Psychic test made for friendly Tzeentch Demon units within 6 inches of that model. And so the Lord of Change with Baleful Sword will be the subject of that stratagem, so it will affect him and Magnus. And so Tzeentch will start with Kairos Fateweaver, who is going to cast Boon of Change onto himself. He will attempt to manifest Gaze of Fate, and he will attempt to manifest Flickering Flames onto this unit of pink horrors. So first, Kairos will attempt to manifest Flickering Flames, and he needs a 5, and he gets it thanks to a Psychic test bonus of +2. The Fleshhounds, which are within 24 inches, will attempt to deny the Witch, and they successfully deny the Witch. So now Kairos will manifest Gaze of Fate, and he needs a 6, and he gets it with the 12. So now Tzeentch can re-roll a single dice roll later during this turn. And finally, Boon of Change onto himself, which needs a 7, and he gets that with a 12. And so now rolling a d3 on the table, and he gets a 2, which is Mystic Strength +1 Strength. So Kairos, until the beginning of the next Tzeentch Psychic phase, will have +1 Strength characteristic. So now the Lord of Change will attempt to manifest both Smite and Bolt of Change onto this Skull Cannon. So starting with Smite, and he gets it with a 9. So D3 mortal wounds, and it will do 3 mortal wounds. And so this Skull Cannon will go from 7 starting wounds down to 4. And now for Bolt of Change, and gets it with an 11. And this will also do D3 mortal wounds, and it will do another 3 mortal wounds. And so the Skull Cannon will go from 4 wounds down to 1 left. And so now Magnus, who can cast 3 psychic powers this turn, has a couple things that he needs to do. The first of which is he is going to attempt to cast Smite onto that Skull Cannon because it is the closest visible enemy unit, and it is within 18 inches. And he's going to cast Smite onto that, or attempt to cast Smite onto that Skull Cannon because it only has 1 wound left. And so attempting to cast Smite, and he gets it with a 9. And it doesn't matter how many mortal wounds it casts, it will do D6, but it doesn't matter because the Skull Cannon only has 1 wound. And so this Skull Cannon is removed, and that will be First Blood for Tzeentch. The second psychic power that Magnus the Red is going to attempt to manifest will be Warp Time onto himself. And Warp Time has a warp charge of 6, and he gets it with a 14. But he will suffer Perils of the Warp, and so it will do D3 mortal wounds, and it'll do 2 mortal wounds. However, we roll dice for each of the mortal wounds thanks to Perils of the Warp, and on a 2-up he ignores them, and he ignores both. So no mortal wounds are taken on Magnus. And so thanks to successfully manifesting Warp Time, Magnus the Red can now move again as if it were the movement phase. And so thanks to being able to move 16 inches again, Magnus the Red will end up here, which puts him at about 5.5 inches away from Skarbrand, which means in the ensuing assault phase, since he is starting in a crater, he will need to roll a 7 or higher in order to make it into combat with Skarbrand. And finally, the third psychic power that Magnus will cast is he will cast Death Hex onto Skarbrand. Death Hex has a warp charge value of 8, and he passes with a 9. And so Skarbrand, until the start of the next Tzeentch Psychic phase, will not be able to take invulnerable saves. And so that concludes the Psychic phase for Tzeentch this turn, which means they will then use the Stratagem Magical Boon for 1 command point, bringing them from 6 down to 5. Use this stratagem at the end of your Psychic phase, select a Tzeentch Demon Psyker from your army. It can immediately attempt to manifest 1 additional Psychic power this turn. And so the Lord of Change is going to attempt to cast Treason of Tzeentch onto the Demon Prince of Khorne. Treason of Tzeentch has a warp charge value of 8, and it goes off with the 10. And so now we roll 2 dice and hope it's higher than the leadership, and it is not, as the Demon Prince of Khorne has a leadership of 9. However, Tzeentch will go from 5 command points down to 4 in order to use a command reroll and reroll that 1, hoping for a 6. And it looked like it was going to be a 6, but it's a 3, so they do not successfully get off Treason of Tzeentch. So going into the shooting phase, we will start with this Soul Grinder, which is going to fire everything into the Bloodthirster sitting next to Skarbrand, the darker orange Bloodthirster. So starting with the Harvester Cannon, 3 shots, hitting on 4s, getting 1 hit. Wounding on a 4, and it wounds. 1 4-up armor save, and it passes. So now D6 shots from the Phlegm Bombardment, getting 4 shots. 4 shots, hitting on 4s, getting 3 hits. Wounding on 3s, getting 3 wounds. 3 5-up invulnerable saves, and fails all 3. And the Chaos Demons of Khorne will use 1 command point, going from 7 down to 6 in order to use a command reroll to reroll 1 of the 4s. And here's the reroll, and they still fail to save. And so, since it's 3 damage apiece, the Bloodthirster of Insensate Rage will take 9 damage. And so this Bloodthirster of Insensate Rage will go from 16 starting wounds down to 7. And finally, this Soul Grinder of Tzeentch, which is the only other Tzeentch unit within range for shooting attacks, is going to fire everything it has into the same Bloodthirster of Insensate Rage. And so this time we'll start with a Phlegm Bombardment, D6 shots, getting 5 shots. 5 shots, hitting on 4s and getting 2 hits. Wounding on 3s and getting 2 wounds. 2 5-up invulnerable saves, passes 1 and fails 1. And so this Bloodthirster will take another 3 automatic damage, which will drop it from 7 wounds down to 4 left. And now the Harvester Cannon, 3 shots, hitting on 4s, getting 2 hits. Wounding on 4s and getting 1 wound. 1 4-up armor save, which it fails. And it will do D6 damage. It will do D3 damage, so it will do 1 damage. And so the Bloodthirster will drop from 4 wounds left down to 3. Going into the assault phase, there are 2 charges to declare. The first of which is going to be this Lord of Change with Baleful Sword and the Impossible Robe is going to declare a charge into this Bloodthirster of Insensate Rage. He is just over 9 inches away, which means he needs a 9-inch charge. And then over here we will have a multi-charge from Magnus the Red into Skarbrand, which will be the primary target, and this Bloodthirster of Insensate Rage. He will need 7 inches or higher in order to make it into combat with Skarbrand, and he will need to roll at least 9 inches in order to make it into combat with the Bloodthirster as well. So starting with the Overwatch from Skarbrand and his Bellow of Endless Fury onto Magnus. D6 shots, getting 5 shots. This weapon automatically hits, so 5 hits. Wounding on 5s, getting 1 wound and 1 cocked dice, and rerolling the cocked dice, which fails to wound. So 1 wound, minus 1 AP, so a 4-up invulnerable save, which fails. So Magnus will go from 18 starting wounds down to 17. And here's his charge distance, getting 7 inches. So he will only make it into combat with Skarbrand. And so Magnus will be in combat with Skarbrand. And so now the charge distance from the Lord of Change into the Bloodthirster, and only getting 5. However, Tzeentch is going to use 1 command point, going from 4 down to 3, and they will also use the reroll from Gaze of Fate in order to reroll both of those charge dice. And looking for a 9, and only gets an 8, so it's still a failed charge. So going into the fight phase, we will go into the only close combat on the board, which is Magnus versus Skarbrand, starting with Magnus. So Magnus has 7 attacks base since he's at 17 wounds, plus 1 attack for being within 8 inches of Skarbrand for 8 attacks total. So 8 attacks, hitting on 2s, re-rolling 1s thanks to himself, getting 6 hits and 2 re-rolls. And here's the 2 re-rolls, getting 2 more hits. Strength 16 versus Toughness 7 means 2s to wound, and getting 6 wounds. And the Blade of Magnus, which he is using, is -4 AP, so Skarbrand will not have an armor save, and since he was death hexed, he cannot take invulnerable saves. And these do an automatic 3 damage apiece, so that is a total of 18 damage. And there's nothing that the Chaos Demons of Khorne can do in an attempt to save that damage, and so since Skarbrand only has 16 starting wounds, the 18 damage will kill Skarbrand off. And so now Magnus, because he is only 3.5 inches away from this Bloodthirster, is going to consolidate 3 inches into combat with the Bloodthirster of Insensate Rage. And so Magnus will end up within an inch of the Bloodthirster, which means he's in combat. Magnus, of course, cannot attack anymore this turn, but the Bloodthirster will get to attack back onto Magnus. And so the Bloodthirster, since it is down to 3 wounds, only has 2 attacks base, plus 1 for being charged, so 3 attacks total, and he will use the Mighty Strike form of his Great Axe of Khorne. However, he's also down to a weapon skill of 4 up, so 3 attacks, hitting on 4s, and hitting with 2. Getting 2 6s, of course, so 2 additional hits thanks to the 6s for 4 hits out of 3 attacks total. Strength 16 versus Toughness 7 means 2s to wound, and getting 4 wounds. 4 4-up invulnerable saves, and passes 2 and failing 2. However, Tzeentch will use 1 command reroll using 1 command point, which will bring them from 3 down to 2 in order to reroll that 3. So here's the reroll, and passing the invuln, so only 1 will go through. So the Bloodthirster will roll 2 dice, taking the highest for damage, and it will do 6 damage. So this means Magnus will drop from 17 wounds down to 11 wounds. However, this means that they are locked in combat, and now Khorne will not be able to shoot at Magnus in the following turn. And so now that the fight phase is over, the Chaos Demons of Khorne are going to use the stratagem Frenetic Bloodlust for 3 command points, which will take them from 6 command points down to 3 left. Use this stratagem at the end of any fight phase, select one of your Khorne demon units. That unit can immediately fight again. And so, of course, the unit that's going to fight again will be the Bloodthirster of Insensate Rage with 3 wounds left onto Magnus. And because this is still the turn that he was charged, he has 3 attacks base using the Mighty Strike form of Great Axe of Khorne, hitting on 2s and getting 2 hits with 1 additional hit and 1 miss. So thanks to the 6, getting 3 hits out of 3 attacks, wounding on 2s, and fails to wound. Oh my goodness, 3 1s, triple 1s for the wound roll, and he fails to wound. Oh, wow. And so the Bloodthirster of Insensate Rage will fail to wound Magnus. And they are not going to use any command points to re-roll that because they only have 3 command points left, and depending on what happens in Chaos Demons of Khorne turn 1, they might need the command points during that turn, and or they might want to use Frenetic Bloodlust again, which costs 3 command points. So they are going to stick with the triple 1s, which means they fail to wound Magnus. And so now going to the morale phase, there are no morale tests to take, as the only units that lost wounds this turn were single model units, and so therefore there are no morale tests to take. Taking a look at the tactical objective cards, Tzeentch successfully secured Objective 3 for 1 victory point. They did complete Kingslayer for killing off Skarbrand, and so that is worth D3 victory points, and so Tzeentch will get 2 victory points for that, rolling a 3. And Tzeentch also did complete Supremacy, since they do hold 3 objective markers at the end of the turn. So that will also give them D3 victory points. And so here's the roll for that, and it will just get them 1. And so Tzeentch was able to successfully complete all 3 tactical objective cards, netting them 4 victory points. And of course, thanks to achieving Slay the Warlord for killing Skarbrand and First Blood from killing that Skull Cannon in the Psychic phase, At the end of Tzeentch turn 1, the score currently sits at 6 victory points for Tzeentch and 0 victory points for the Chaos Demons of Khorne. So going into Chaos Demons of Khorne, turn 1, a reminder that the Chaos Demons of Khorne have 3 command points left, and Tzeentch has 2 command points left. So at the start of the turn, they need to draw 3 tactical objective cards, and they draw Defend Objective 4, score 2 victory points if you control Objective Marker 4 at the end of 2 consecutive turns. They draw Secure Objective 2, score 1 victory point if you control Objective Marker 2 at the end of your turn. And Defend Objective 5, score 2 victory points if you control Objective Marker 5 at the end of 2 consecutive turns. Objective Marker 4 is this one right here, currently being held by these Pink Horrors and Kairos Fateweaver. Objective Marker 2 is this one right here, currently being held by these Pink Horrors. And Objective Marker 5 is this one right here, currently not being held by anyone, but probably will be held by Khorne at the end of this turn. So going into the movement phase, Chaos Demons of Khorne will start by having this squad of Bloodletters move up the board 6 inches, and they will also declare an advance. And here's their advance roll, getting an additional 6 inches for 12 inches of total movement. And the Bloodletters will finish their movement right here. Now this Skull Cannon is going to move up the board up to 6 inches to better hold Objective Marker 6. And the Skull Cannon will finish its movement right here. This Bloodthirster of Insensate Rage, with only 3 wounds left, is going to remain locked in combat with Magnus the Red. This Bloodthirster of Insensate Rage is going to move down and around up to 12 inches in order to engage Magnus the Red in the ensuing assault and fight phase. And the Bloodthirster will end up right here, with his base just over an inch away from the base of Magnus the Red. This Demon Prince of Khorne with the Skull Reaver is going to move up to 12 inches towards the Lord of Change with Baleful Sword. And it will finish its movement right here, just over an inch away from the base of the Lord of Change. And now these Bloodletters are going to move up the board 6 inches towards that Lord of Change. And the Bloodletters will finish their movement right here. Now this squad of Bloodletters is going to move up the board 6 inches, and they will declare an advance. And here's their advance roll, getting an additional 5 inches for 11 inches of total movement. And the Bloodletters will finish their movement right here. So now this Skull Cannon is going to move up the board up to 6 inches to be closer to Objective Marker 5. And it will finish its movement here, and now it is within 3 inches of the center of Objective Marker 5. Finally, these Fleshhounds are going to move up the board 10 inches towards the Tzeentch deployment zone. And the Fleshhounds will finish their movement here. So going into the shooting phase, we will start with this Skull Cannon shooting Kairos Fateweaver. D6 shots, getting 2 shots. Hitting on 4 since it moved, getting 1 hit. Wounding on a 3, and it wounds. 1 4-up invulnerable save, which it fails. D3 damage, and it will do 1 damage. So Kairos Fateweaver will go from 16 starting wounds down to 15. And finally, this Skull Cannon is going to fire into this Soul Grinder of Tzeentch. D6 shots, getting 2 shots. Hitting on 4s since it moved, and getting 1 hit. Wounding on a 3, and it fails to wound. Going into the assault phase for Chaos Demons of Khorne turn 1, there are 4 charges to declare. The first will be these Fleshhounds declaring a charge into Kairos Fateweaver. The second will be the Demon Prince of Khorne declaring a charge into the Lord of Change. The third will be these Bloodletters declaring a charge into the Lord of Change. And the fourth will be this Bloodthirster declaring a charge into Magnus. So starting with the Fleshhounds into Kairos Fateweaver, getting 8 inches. And that will not be enough because they are 10 inches away and charging through a crater, which means they need a 12-inch charge. So that will be a failed charge. Now for the Demon Prince of Khorne charging into the Lord of Change, and he will get 6 inches. And so now the Demon Prince of Khorne will be locked in combat with the Lord of Change. Next will be the Bloodletters declaring a charge into the Lord of Change, getting 8 inches. And here's how those Bloodletters will end up, and they will all be in combat. And finally, the Bloodthirster charging into Magnus, getting 5 inches, which will be more than enough. And this Bloodthirster is now in combat with Magnus the Red. And we will start with the Demon Prince of Khorne with Skull Reaver attacking the Lord of Change with Baleful Sword. So the Demon Prince of Khorne with wings will have 6 attacks on the charge with Skull Reaver, plus 1 additional attack with the Malefic Talon. So 6 attacks with Skull Reaver, hitting on 2s, rerolling 1s thanks to himself, and getting 2 rerolls, so getting 6 hits. Strength 11 versus Toughness 7 means 3s to wound and getting 4 wounds, with one of them being a 6, which will cause D3 additional mortal wounds. So starting with the D3 mortal wounds, it will do just 1 mortal wound. And so the Lord of Change with Baleful Sword will go from 16 starting wounds down to 15. And now against the regular wounds, 4 3-up invulnerable saves and passes 3 of them. And this will do D6 damage, doing an additional 4 damage. And so the Lord of Change will drop from 15 wounds down to 11. And so now the 1 attack from the Malefic Talon, hitting on a 2, getting a hit, wounding on a 3, and getting a wound. 1 3-up invulnerable save, which fails. And that will do an automatic 2 damage. And so the Lord of Change with Baleful Sword will drop from 11 wounds down to 9. And so now Tzeentch will use the stratagem Counteroffensive, using their last 2 command points, going from 2 down to 0. This stratagem is used right after an enemy unit that charged has fought. Select one of your own eligible units and fight with it next. And of course the unit that fights will be Magnus the Red. And so Magnus, since he has 11 wounds still, he will have 7 attacks base, so he will place 1 attack onto the Bloodthirster with 3 wounds left, who is already locked in combat this turn, and he will place the other 6 attacks onto the Bloodthirster that charged. So starting with the 1 attack onto the Bloodthirster that was already locked in combat, hitting on a 2, and it hits. Strength 16 versus Toughness 7 is a 2 to wound, and it fails to wound. So now the 6 attacks onto the Bloodthirster that charged, hitting on 2s, getting 6 hits. Wounding on 2s, and getting 5 wounds. 5 5-up invulnerable saves, and fails all 5 of them. And so the Bloodthirster that charged will take 15 damage, which will drop it from 16 starting wounds down to 1 left. And so now we will go back to the units that charged this turn, so we will do this Bloodthirster of Insensate Rage, which charged onto Magnus. And now that he's down to only 1 wound, he only has 2 attacks base plus 1 for charging, so 3 attacks in Mighty Strike form, hitting on 4s, and fails to hit with all of them. So now we will do these Bloodletters, which are the last charging unit, onto the Lord of Change. 21 attacks on the charge, hitting on 3s, rerolling 1s thanks to the Demon Prince. And getting 4 rerolls and 4 definite misses. And so here's the rerolls. Getting 2 more hits and 2 more misses. So 15 hits out of 21 attacks. Strength 5 versus Toughness 7 is 5s to wound. And getting 3 wounds. So 3 3-up invulnerable saves, passes 1, and fails 2. And because the 3 attacks that wounded were all rolls of 6s, they are double damage, and so the 2 that get past the 3-up invulnerable save will do a total of 4 damage onto the Lord of Change. Which means that the Lord of Change will go from 9 remaining wounds down to 5 left. So now going into units that did not charge this turn, we will start with this Bloodthirster of Insensate Rage. Only 2 attacks base, with Mighty Strike hitting on 4s, getting 1 hit, 1 miss, but it is a 6, so that causes an additional hit. So 2 hits out of 2 attacks. Strength 14 versus Toughness 7 is 2s to wound, and getting 2 wounds. 2 4-up invulnerable saves, and fails both. So 2d6 damage, doing 5 damage. And so Magnus will go from 11 wounds left down to 6 wounds left. I do actually need to make a correction on the Bloodthirster that did not charge, the one that was already locked in combat and down to 3 wounds. When he made his attacks, I only rolled d6 damage for each of the wounds that got past the invulnerable save, and I should have rolled 2d6, taking the highest. So he rolled a 4 and a 1, and so we will start with the second dice for the 4, which would do 2 more wounds, and a second dice for the 1, which would still only roll a 1. And so instead of 5 damage, it would actually do 7 damage, which will bring Magnus from 6 wounds down to 4. And then finally, the Lord of Change with Baleful Sword will get to attack. And the Lord of Change, since it is down to 5 wounds, has only 4 attacks base, and it will use all 4 attacks with the Baleful Sword onto the Demon Prince of Khorne. So 4 attacks hitting on 3s, getting 2 hits. Strength 7 versus Toughness 6 means 3s to wound and getting 2 wounds. 2 5-up invulnerable saves, and passes 1, fails 1. And this will do d6 damage, and it will do 5 damage. And so the Demon Prince of Khorne will go from 6 starting wounds down to 3. And so now at the end of the fight phase, the Chaos Demons of Khorne are going to use their last 3 command points, going from 3 down to 0, in order to use the stratagem Frenetic Bloodlust. Use this stratagem at the end of any fight phase, select one of your Khorne Demon units. That unit can immediately fight again. And the unit that's going to fight again this turn will be this Bloodthirster of Insensate Rage, who is down to 1 wound left, but who charged this turn, fighting Magnus. So 3 attacks on the charge using Mighty Strike from the Great Axe of Khorne, hitting on 4s and getting 1 hit. Wounding on a 2, and it wounds. 4-up invulnerable save, which fails. D6 damage taking the highest. And doing 6 damage, which will finish off Magnus. And so that additional 6 damage will mean that Magnus will be removed. So at the end of the fight phase, both of the Bloodthirsters of Insensate Rage will choose not to consolidate because they don't want to be closer to the Soul Grinders and make it easier for the Soul Grinders to charge. And so then going into the morale phase, there are no morale tests to take. And so taking a look at the tactical objective cards, the Chaos Demons of Khorne did not finish defending Objective 4, they did not secure Objective 2, and they did not finish defending Objective 5, which means next turn they will throw all 3 away and draw 3 new ones. So at the end of Chaos Demons of Khorne, turn 1, the score currently sits at 0 victory points for the Chaos Demons of Khorne and 6 victory points for Tzeentch. Going into Tzeentch turn 2, a reminder that Tzeentch has 0 command points left, and the Chaos Demons of Khorne have 0 command points left. Because Tzeentch completed all 3 tactical objectives that they drew in Tzeentch turn 1, they drew 3 new tactical objective cards this turn, and they drew Defend Objective 5, score 2 victory points if you control Objective Marker 5 at the end of 2 consecutive turns. Assassinate, score 1 victory point if at least 1 enemy character was destroyed during this turn. If 3 or more enemy characters were destroyed during this turn, score D3 victory points instead. And Secure Objective 5, score 1 victory point if you control Objective Marker 5 at the end of your turn. And Objective Marker 5 is this one right here, currently being held by a squad of Fleshhounds and a Skull Cannon. So going into the movement phase, we will start with this Soul Grinder moving 8 inches up the board towards those blood letters. And the Soul Grinder will finish its movement right here. Next, this Pink Horror squad, most of the models in the squad will remain still, but a few on this side will move up a few inches up the board in order to just be within 18 inches of those blood letters for the purpose of casting Smite. And so this is how they ended up, and now those blood letters are within the range of Smite. This Soul Grinder is going to move 8 inches up the board, and it will finish its movement here. Next, this Lord of Change is going to fall back a few inches over in this direction, and the Lord of Change will fall back to here. Now this squad of Pink Horrors is going to move up the board 6 inches, and they will finish their movement right here. Next, Kairos Fateweaver is going to move up the board up to 12 inches to be just over an inch away from those Fleshhounds, and he will finish his movement here. Finally, these Pink Horrors are going to move up the board 6 inches, and they will finish their movement right here. So now going into the Psychic phase, we will start with this squad of Pink Horrors casting Smite into those blood letters because base to base they are the closest visible enemy unit. And we only roll 1 dice looking for a 5 or a 6, and they failed to get it off. So Kairos Fateweaver is going to attempt to manifest Gaze of Fate. He will attempt to manifest Flickering Flames onto these Pink Horrors, and he will attempt to manifest Smite onto those Fleshhounds. Starting with Smite onto the Fleshhounds, and gets it with a 10. The Fleshhounds will attempt to deny the Witch, and they fail to do so. It will do D3 mortal wounds, and will do 3 mortal wounds. And so 1 healthy Fleshhound will be killed off, and 1 additional Fleshhound will go down to 1 wound. Now for Gaze of Fate, needing a 6, and gets it with a 9. And finally, Flickering Flames onto the Pink Horrors, and gets it with a 14. And he did suffer a Perils of the Warp, but thanks to his Warlord trait, Tyrant of the Warp, roll a dice each time your Warlord suffers Perils of the Warp on a 2-up. Your Warlord's Psychic Mastery is such that they do not suffer Perils of the Warp. And so here's the dice roll, and he does not suffer Perils of the Warp. So thanks to Flickering Flames, the Pink Horrors that it was manifested onto until the start of the next Tzeentch Psychic phase add 1 to any wound rolls made for that unit's shooting weapons. And of course, Gaze of Fate, they get 1 dice reroll later this turn. So now the Lord of Change with Baleful Sword will attempt to cast Smite and Bolt of Change onto the Demon Prince of Khorne. Starting with Smite, and gets it with an 8 since he is still at 5 wounds and therefore still has +1 to his psychic test bonus. So it will go off, and it will do D3 mortal wounds, and it will do 2 mortal wounds. And so the Demon Prince of Khorne will go from 3 wounds left down to 1. And so now Bolt of Change, which has a warp charge value of 8, and gets it with an 8, thanks to his psychic test bonus. It will do D3 mortal wounds, but that doesn't matter because the Demon Prince is down to only 1 wound left. And so this Demon Prince will be killed off and removed. And so now those Pink Horrors will attempt to manifest Smite into these Bloodletters. And on a 5 or a 6 they get it, and they fail to get it. And then finally, the Pink Horrors on the other side of this Soul Grinder will attempt to cast Smite into these Bloodletters. Looking for a 5 or 6, and they fail to get it. So going into the shooting phase, we will start with this Soul Grinder right here, which will shoot its Harvester Cannon at the Bloodthirster of Insensate Rage, the one that's down to 1 wound, and he will shoot his Phlegm Bombardment into the darker orange Bloodthirster of Insensate Rage, the one that has 3 wounds left. And I just realized that he does have to subtract 1 from his hit rolls when shooting those weapons when he moves. So I apologize if that did anything last turn. So the Harvester Cannon, 3 shots, hitting on 5s and getting 1 hit. Wounding on a 4, and it fails to wound. So now onto the darker orange Bloodthirster, D6 shots from the Phlegm Bombardment, doing 6 shots. Hitting on 5s and getting 3 hits. Wounding on 3s, getting 3 wounds. 3 5-up invulnerable saves, and passes 2, failing 1. And the Phlegm Bombardment does an automatic 3 damage, so that Bloodthirster will be killed off. And so this Bloodthirster with only 3 wounds left is removed. And once again, I do apologize about the fact that I had forgotten in Tzeentch turn 1 that if they move, they have to subtract 1 from their hit rolls, since they're firing heavy weapons and they don't have something like Power of the Machine Spirit. And so to make up for that, this Soul Grinder is not going to shoot at all this turn, in order to make up for the fact that I probably got some hit rolls and possibly did some wounds to that Bloodthirster, the one that had only 3 wounds left. I don't know that all of those wounds would have been done had I remembered to do the correct hit rolls, so this Soul Grinder will not shoot at all this turn to make up for that. So next, this squad of Pink Horrors is going to shoot into these Bloodletters. 20 attacks with the corresponding flames, hitting on 4s. Getting 13 hits, and actually getting 14 hits, so a pretty good hit roll. Wounding on 4s, getting 8 wounds. 8 5-up invulnerable saves, passes 1, and fails 7. And so 7 Bloodletters will be removed, leaving 3 left alive. And finally, this squad of Pink Horrors is all fully within range of this squad of Bloodletters, so they will shoot as well. 20 shots, hitting on 4s, getting 10 hits. Thanks to Flickering Flames, they wound on 3s, getting 8 wounds. 8 5-up invulnerable saves, and they pass 4, failing 4. And so 4 Bloodletters will be removed, leaving 6 alive. And finally, I realized that because I was able to move into range for Smite with a couple of the models from this Pink Horror squad, at least a few of the models would be able to shoot the Bloodletters that they threw Smite at, but I will not have them shoot, partially to help make up for the fact that the Soul Grinders had used the wrong ballistic skill the previous turn. And in fact, I'm actually going to put this Bloodthirster back on the table about where it was before, with its 3 wounds left, to make up for the fact that it wouldn't have lost, most likely wouldn't have lost 13 wounds last turn from shooting from both of the Soul Grinders, which might seem extreme, but I feel bad about the fact that I forgot that the Soul Grinders don't get to keep their normal weapon skill when moving and shooting with heavy weapons, and so this Bloodthirster is about where it was before, and so it will still be alive, so we will just completely ignore all of the shooting from the Tzeentch model over on this side of the table to make up for Tzeentch turn 1. Going into the Tzeentch turn 2 assault phase, I will have this Soul Grinder charge into these Bloodletters, however. So that will be the first charge to declare. The second charge will be these Pink Horrors charging into this squad of Bloodletters. And the third charge will be Kairos Fateweaver declaring a charge into the Fleshhounds. Kairos Fateweaver is just over an inch away and he's not charging through a crater, so he will automatically make it in. So the first charge that we do need to roll for, though, is the Pink Horrors charging into the Bloodletters, getting an 8-inch charge, which will be enough to make it in. Because of the instrument, they get +1 to charge rolls for a 9-inch charge total. And so now they will all be in combat. Finally, the charge range for the Soul Grinder is the Bloodletters, getting an 8-inch charge. And he is only 8.5 inches away, however, he is currently sitting in a crater, which means he is charging through a crater. And therefore, 8 inches will fail, but Tzeentch will use their 1 reroll, thanks to Gaze of Fate, in order to re-roll the 3. And so they're looking for at least another 5, and they get it. So that Soul Grinder will be in combat. And so now that Soul Grinder is locked in combat with those Bloodletters. And we will start with the Soul Grinder attacking the Bloodletters. So the Soul Grinder, since he's at full health, has 5 attack space, and he will use all 5 attacks with his Warped Sword so that he gets to re-roll failed hit rolls. So hitting on 4s, re-rolling misses, getting 2 hits, 3 misses, and the re-rolls, getting 2 more hits, for a total of 4 hits out of 5 attacks. Wounding on 2s, getting 3 wounds. 3 5-up invulnerable saves, and they pass 1, failing 2. So 2 Bloodletters will go down. Now for these Pink Horrors, attacking the 3 remaining Bloodletters. 11 attacks, hitting on 4s, getting 4 hits. Wounding on 4s, getting 4 wounds. And 4 5-up invulnerable saves, and they fail 3. And so this squad of Bloodletters is completely wiped out. And those Pink Horrors will not consolidate, so moving on to the final charging unit, which is Kairos Fateweaver onto the Fleshhounds. So Kairos Fateweaver, since he still has 15 wounds left, has 5 attacks base, attacking with his Staff of Tomorrow. 5 attacks, hitting on 3s, and getting 4 hits. Strength 8 versus Toughness 4 means 2s to wound, and getting 4 wounds. 4 5-up invulnerable saves, and they pass 3, failing 2. And so the 2 that go through do d6 damage apiece. However, the first one will simply remove the final wound from the 1 wounded Fleshhound. And so the 1d6 roll will only make 1 wound, of course. So the 1 wounded Fleshhound will go down, and then 1 additional Fleshhound will go down to 1 wound. And so now they will pile in and fight back, and they will all be in combat against Kairos. So the Fleshhounds have 3 attacks apiece since they were charged. So 18 attacks total, hitting on 3s, getting 11 hits, wounding on 5s, and getting 4 wounds. Minus 1 AP, so 4 4-up invulnerable saves, and Kairos will pass 2 and fail 2. And they will do 1 damage apiece, so Kairos will go from 15 wounds down to 13 wounds. And so now the Bloodletters will pile in and fight back, and they will all be in combat. The 7 Bloodletters and the 1 Blood Reaper will have 17 attacks since they were charged, hitting on 3s, getting 11 hits, wounding on 5s, and getting 2 wounds. 2 4-up invulnerable saves, and fails both. And so the Soul Grinder will go from 14 starting wounds down to 12. So going into the morale phase, there are 3 units that need to take morale checks this turn. The first is this squad of Bloodletters, which lost 2 models. The second is this squad of Bloodletters, which lost 4 models. And the third and final squad that needs to take a morale check is this squad of Fleshhounds, which lost 2 models. So starting with the squad of Bloodletters that lost 2 models, they roll a 1, so they pass their morale check. Now for the squad of Bloodletters that lost 4 models this turn, and they fail their morale check by 2. And so 2 more Bloodletters will be removed. And finally, the squad of Fleshhounds that lost 2 models, and they pass their morale check. So now taking a look at the tactical objective cards, they did not finish defending objective 5. They did complete Assassinate by killing the 1 Demon Prince of Khorne for 1 victory point, and they failed to secure objective 5. So at the end of Tzeentch turn 2, the score currently sits at 7 victory points for Tzeentch and 0 victory points for the Chaos Demons of Khorne. So going into Chaos Demons of Khorne, turn 2, the first thing that needs to happen is they have to throw away the 3 tactical objective cards from the previous turn, since the opportunity to achieve those targets has been lost. So they throw away Defend Objective 4, Secure Objective 2, and Defend Objective 5. But they draw 3 new ones, and they draw Secure Objective 6, Defend Objective 2, and Mission Critical Objective. When this tactical objective is generated, roll a d6, score 1 victory point if you control the corresponding objective marker. If the corresponding objective marker was controlled by your opponent at the start of your turn and you control it at the end of your turn, score d3 victory points instead. And here's the roll, getting a 6. Luckily for the Chaos Demons of Khorne, objective marker 6 is this one right here, currently being held by a Skull Cannon. And objective marker 2 is right here, back within the Tzeentch deployment zone, currently not being held by anybody. Going into the movement phase for Chaos Demons of Khorne turn 2, we will start by having these bloodletters fall back away from the Soul Grinder this direction up to 6 inches. And they will finish their movement right here, no longer in combat. The Skull Cannon sitting on objective marker 6 will remain still. The brighter orange Bloodthirster is going to move up the board 6 inches now that it's down to 1 wound. And it will finish its movement right here. And now the darker orange Bloodthirster will also move up the board 6 inches. And so it will finish its movement right here. This Skull Cannon will remain still. These Fleshhounds will remain locked in combat with Kairos Fateweaver. These Bloodletters are going to move 6 inches up the board. And they will finish their movement right here. Going into the shooting phase, this Skull Cannon is going to fire into the Lord of Change with Baleful Sword, which he can see. D6 shots, getting 4 shots. Hitting on 3s, getting 2 hits. Wounding on 3s, getting 2 wounds. 2 3-up invulnerable saves, passes 1 and fails 1. D3 damage, and it will do 2 damage. So the Lord of Change with Baleful Sword will go from 5 wounds down to 3. And then finally, this Skull Cannon is going to fire into the Soul Grinder. D6 shots, getting 3 shots. Hitting on 3s, getting 2 hits. Wounding on 3s, getting 2 wounds. 2 4-up invulnerable saves, and passes both. So now going into the assault phase, both of these Bloodthirsters will declare a charge into that Soul Grinder. And finally, this squad of Bloodletters will declare a charge into Kairos Fateweaver. So starting with the Bloodletters, there is no Overwatch, however they are charging through a crater, and so double 1s will fail to charge anything else and they will be in. And they make it with a 5. And so now all of the Bloodletters will be in combat. So then going over to the 2 Bloodthirsters, we will start with the one that has 1 wound left because it has a shorter distance to travel to get into combat, and it does not have to charge through a crater as well. So it's more likely to make it in. However, it will have to take Overwatch first, and of course, because it only has 1 wound, there is a chance that it could die. So starting with the Soul Grinder's Overwatch, with the Harvester Cannon, 3 shots hitting on 6s, and all fail to hit. Now for the Phlegm Bombardment, D6 shots, getting 6 shots. 6 shots, hitting on 6s, and getting 2 hits, of course. Wounding on 3s, getting 1 wound. 1 5-up invulnerable save, which passes. So here's the charge distance, getting 9 inches. So the Bloodthirster makes it in. And so now the charge distance for the darker orange Bloodthirster with 3 wounds left, that will not be enough to make it in. And just in case anyone was wondering, the brighter orange Bloodthirster was 7 inches away from the Soul Grinder, and so since he rolled a 9, even if he had to charge through the crater, he still would have made it into combat. So going into the fight phase, we will first resolve the Bloodthirster attacking the Soul Grinder. Using the Mighty Strike, 3 attacks on the charge, hitting on 4s, and all fail to hit, of course. So now we will resolve the Bloodletter's attacks onto Kairos Fateweaver. 9 attacks on the charge, hitting on 3s, getting 6 hits. Wounding on 5s, getting 2 wounds, with one of them doing double damage. So the double damage, 4 up invuln, which saves, and the single damage will go through. So Kairos Fateweaver will go from 13 wounds down to 12 left. And now we will go to units that did not charge, starting with the Fleshhounds. 6 Fleshhounds remaining, so 12 attacks, hitting on 3s, getting 10 hits. Wounding on 5s, getting 3 wounds. 3 4-up invulnerable saves, passes 2, failing 1. So Kairos Fateweaver will go from 12 wounds down to 11. So now we will resolve Kairos Fateweaver's attacks, and he will put all 5 of his base attacks, since he's still at 11 wounds, onto the Fleshhounds. 5 attacks, hitting on 3s, getting 4 hits. Strength 8 versus Toughness 4 means 2s to wound and getting 4 wounds. 4 5-up invulnerable saves, passing 1, failing 3, and they do d6 damage apiece. However, the first one will simply take off the 1 wounded Fleshhound. So the second strike will do d6 damage, will do 2 damage, so a second fully healthy Fleshhound will go down. And the third strike will do 4 damage, so a third Fleshhound, one that is also fully healthy, will go down. So 3 of the 6 Fleshhounds will go down, starting with the 1 wounded Fleshhound, and then 2 fully healthy Fleshhounds. And so then finally the Soul Grinder attacking back onto the Bloodthirster with 1 wound left. He is still at full health, so 5 base attacks, and he will use the Warp Sword because the Bloodthirster only has 1 wound, and this way he gets to reroll failed hit rolls. So 5 attacks, hitting on 4s, rerolling failed hit rolls, getting 4 hits so far and 1 miss. And here's the reroll, getting all 5 hits. Wounding on 3s, and getting 4 wounds. 4 5-up invulnerable saves, and he passes all 4! And he passes all 4! Do you see that? The Bloodthirster with 1 wound left passes all 4 5-up invulnerable saves. Oh my goodness. That is absolutely incredible. Oh my goodness. And so this Bloodthirster with 1 wound left will survive this fight phase, which means that's the end of the fight phase. So going into the morale phase, the only unit that needs to take a morale test this turn is the squad of Fleshhounds, which did lose 3 models this turn. And so the Fleshhounds, with their leadership of 7, pass. Barely pass their morale check. And so now we will take a quick look at the tactical objective cards, and the Chaos Demons of Khorne did secure Objective 6 thanks to the Skull Cannon. They did not finish defending Objective 2, but they did complete Mission Critical Objective 6, although they did not take it from Tzeentch, so they only get 1 victory point for it. But that will give them 2 new victory points. So at the end of Chaos Demons of Khorne turn 2, which is also the end of the bottom of turn 2, the score currently sits at 2 victory points for the Chaos Demons of Khorne and 7 victory points for Tzeentch. Going into Tzeentch turn 3, they will start by throwing away Defend Objective 5 and Secure Objective 5 as the opportunity to secure those targets has been lost. But they will get to draw 3 new ones, and so they draw the Dominion of Chaos. Score D3 victory points if you control more objective markers than your opponent at the end of this turn. Defend Objective 4. Score 2 victory points if you control objective marker 4 at the end of 2 consecutive turns. And Hold the Line. Score 1 victory point if you have at least 3 units completely within your deployment zone and your opponent has no models within your deployment zone at the end of your turn. This objective cannot be achieved on your first turn. And objective marker 4 is this one right here, currently being held by the squad of Pink Horrors. Going into the movement phase of Tzeentch turn 3, this squad of Pink Horrors is going to stand still. Kairos Fateweaver is going to remain locked in combat with the Fleshhounds and the Bloodletters. The Lord of Change with Baleful Sword is going to move 6 inches up the board towards those Bloodletters that are in combat with Kairos Fateweaver. These Pink Horrors are going to move up the board 6 inches towards the Chaos Demons of Khorne deployment zone, and they will also declare an advance. And here's their advance roll, getting an additional 2 inches for 8 inches of total movement. And so the Pink Horrors will finish their movement right here, currently holding objective marker 1. This Soul Grinder will remain locked in combat with the Bloodthirster. this Soul Grinder will remain still. And finally, this squad of pink horrors is going to move up the board up to 6 inches towards the Chaos Demons of Khorne deployment zone. And the pink horrors will finish their movement right here, and they are all within 18-inch range of these bloodletters. So going into the psychic phase, for Tzeentch turn 3, we will start with Kairos Fateweaver, and he will start with Gaze of Fate. And then he will cast Infernal Gateway onto the Fleshhounds, since both the Fleshhounds and the Bloodletters are equally close. And then he will cast Smite onto the Fleshhounds. So starting with Gaze of Fate, which needs a 6, and he gets it with the 9. The Fleshhounds will attempt to deny the Witch, and they fail to do so. So Tzeentch will have 1 dice roll later this turn, 1 dice reroll later this turn. So now for Infernal Gateway, which needs an 8 or higher, and he gets it with a 10. So starting with D3 mortal wounds onto the Fleshhounds, doing 1. So 1 Fleshhound will take 1 mortal wound. Now for the Bloodletters, D3 mortal wounds, doing 2 mortal wounds. So 2 regular Bloodletters will go down. And then finally D3 mortal wounds onto himself, doing 2. So Kairos Fateweaver will go from 11 wounds down to 9. And so now for his Smite onto the Fleshhounds, getting a 6. So D3 mortal wounds, and doing 3 mortal wounds, which means the 1 wounded Fleshhound is removed, and so is 1 fully healthy Fleshhound. So now the pink horrors will attempt to cast Smite into the Bloodletters, looking for a 5 or 6, and fails with the 2. So now the Lord of Change will attempt to cast Smite into the Bloodletters and attempt to cast Bolt of Change into the Fleshhound. Since he's down to 3 wounds left, he no longer has a Psychic Test bonus, so needing an 8 for Bolt of Change, and gets it. And it will do D3 mortal wounds, and it will do 3 mortal wounds. And so the final Fleshhound is killed off. Now for Smite into the Bloodletters, and gets it with a 7. And it will do D3 mortal wounds, and it will do 2 mortal wounds. And so the final 2 Bloodletters are killed off, which means Kairos Fateweaver is no longer locked in combat. And so then finally this squad of pink horrors will cast Smite onto these Bloodletters, looking for a 5 or 6, and fails to get it off. I did forget this squad of pink horrors, which I did mean to do. They can see through this building here. They can see the Bloodthirster, so they will attempt to cast Smite onto him. So looking for a 5 or a 6, and they fail to get it anyways. So now going into the shooting phase for Tzeentch turn 3, we will start with this Soul Grinder, who will fire everything he has into the Dark Orange Bloodthirster. And he did not move this time, so he will actually have a ballistic skill of 4 up. And we will start with the Phlegm Bombardment, D6 shots, getting 3 shots. Hitting on 4s, getting 1 hit. Wounding on a 3, and it wounds. 1 5-up invulnerable save, which fails. And the Phlegm Bombardment does an automatic 3 damage, which means this Bloodthirster with its final 3 wounds is killed off. This does mean, of course, that the Harvester Cannon on the Soul Grinder is wasted. So finally, the only thing left to fire is these 10 pink horrors into the Bloodletters. 20 shots, hitting on 4s, getting lots of misses, getting a total of 6 hits out of 20 attacks. Wounding on 4s, getting 3 wounds. 3 5-up invulnerable saves, and they fail all 3. And so 3 Bloodletters will be removed. So now going into the assault phase, there are 2 charges to declare. The first is this Soul Grinder declaring a charge into those Bloodletters. And the second charge will be Kairos Fateweaver, who's no longer engaged in combat, declaring a charge into the Skull Cannon. So starting with Kairos into the Skull Cannon, we do have to resolve Overwatch. D6 shots from the Skull Cannon, getting 3 shots. 3 shots, hitting on 6s, getting 2 hits. Wounding on 3s, getting 1 wound. 1 4-up invulnerable save, which fails. And this will do D3 damage, doing 3 damage. So Kairos will drop from 9 wounds left down to 6. Now for his charge distance, and he fails it with a 3. However, he only needs a 6-inch charge in order to be within an inch, so they will use their 1 reroll this turn thanks to Gaze of Fate in order to reroll the 1. So looking for a 4-up, and they get it, so they make it into combat. And so Kairos Fateweaver will now be locked in combat with the Skull Cannon. And so now we will do the charge distance for the Soul Grinder into the Bloodletters, since there's no Overwatch. And so here's that charge distance, and gets it with a 5. And so now the Soul Grinder will be in combat with those Bloodletters, and we will first resolve this combat. And so the Soul Grinder, who still has 12 wounds left, has 5 attacks base using the Warp Sword, hitting on 4s. Rerolling misses, getting 3 hits so far, and 2 rerolls, getting 5 hits. Wounding on 2s, and getting 4 wounds. 4 5-up invulnerable saves, and they pass 1 but fail 3. And so 3 Bloodletters will go down. Now we will resolve Kairos Fateweaver's attacks onto the Skull Cannon. He is down to 3 attacks base, since he's down to only 6 wounds, so 3 attacks with the Staff of Tomorrow, hitting on 3s and getting 1 hit. Wounding on a 3, and it wounds. 1 5-up invulnerable save, which fails. And this will do d6 damage, and it will do 5 damage. So the Skull Cannon will drop from 7 starting wounds down to 2. And so now that all of the charging units have gone, now this Soul Grinder will get to strike against the Bloodthirster of Insensate Rage with 1 wound left. The Soul Grinder still has all of its wounds left, so 5 attacks with the Warp Sword, hitting on 4s, getting 3 hits and 2 rerolls. And 2 rerolls, 1 cocked dice and 1 miss. And here's the cocked dice, still fails to hit. Wounding on 3s, getting 2 wounds. 2 5-up invulnerable saves. And he passes both again! Oh my goodness, that Bloodthirster with 1 wound left just will not die. Oh my goodness. So to reward that Bloodthirster for still being alive, we're gonna let him attack back first. So 2 attacks with Mighty Strike, hitting on 4s. And both hit. Strength 14 versus Toughness 7, 2s to wound. And 1 wound. 1 4-up invulnerable save, which fails. So rolling 2 dice, taking the highest for damage, and it will do 6 damage. So this Soul Grinder will drop from 14 wounds down to 8. Now the Bloodletters will pile in and fight against the Soul Grinder. 1 Bloodletter and 1 Blood Reaper means 5 attacks since they were charged this turn, hitting on 3s, getting 3 hits. Wounding on 5s, getting 1 wound, but it will be 2 damage if it goes through. 1 4-up invulnerable save, which fails. So this Soul Grinder is reduced from 12 down to 10 wounds. And so then finally the Skull Cannon will fight back against Kairos Fateweaver. The Skull Cannon will have 3 attacks since it was charged this turn, hitting on 3s, getting 1 hit. Wounding on a 5. And it wounds. 1 4-up invulnerable save, which fails. But it was only 1 damage, so Kairos will drop from 6 wounds down to 5 left. So going into the morale phase, since the fight phase is over, there is only 1 unit that needs to take a morale test, and that is this unit of Bloodletters, which lost 6 models this turn. And so here's the morale test. They have leadership of 7, and they fail by 3. And so this means the final 2 Bloodletters are removed. So taking a look at the tactical objective cards, Tzeentch did complete the Dominion of Chaos, score D3 victory points if you control more objective markers than your opponent at the end of the turn. Tzeentch is currently holding 3 objective markers, and thanks to Kairos making it into combat against that Skull Cannon, that objective marker that the Skull Cannon was holding is now contested, which means Chaos Demons of Khorne are only holding 1 objective. So Tzeentch will win that 3 objectives to 1, which means they get D3 victory points, getting 2 more victory points. However, Tzeentch did not finish defending Objective 4, and they did not hold the line because they actually have no units within their own deployment zone. So they failed to get both of those. So at the end of Tzeentch turn 3, the score currently sits at 9 victory points for Tzeentch and 2 victory points for the Chaos Demons of Khorne. So going into Chaos Demons of Khorne turn 3, they need to start by throwing away Defend Objective 2 from the turn before, but they get to draw 3 new ones, and the first one they draw is Cycle of Life. Score 1 victory point if an enemy infantry unit was destroyed during this turn. If an enemy infantry unit was destroyed by one of your Nurgle Demon units during this turn, score D3 victory points instead. Secure Objective 4, score 1 victory point if you control Objective Marker 4 at the end of your turn. And Secure Objective 3, score 1 victory point if you control Objective Marker 3 at the end of your turn. And Objective Marker 4 is this one right here, currently being held by these pink horrors. And Objective Marker 3 is this one right here, currently being held by these pink horrors. And taking into account that it would be pretty much impossible, it actually is impossible, for Khorne to destroy an infantry unit on the Tzeentch side this turn, as they only have one skull cannon that's unengaged, and the skull cannon at most would only be able to kill off 6 pink horrors. Now, possibly they lose a bunch of pink horrors and then fail a morale check, but the likelihood of that happening with a 4-up invuln, and considering how many shots we've been getting this game from units that do D6 shots, which hasn't been very much, both of the objective markers that they need to capture are impossible to obtain, since they are much closer to the Tzeentch deployment zone than the Chaos Daemons of Khorne deployment zone. And also currently Tzeentch does not hold Line Breaker, as they have no models at all within the Chaos Daemons of Khorne deployment zone. And so at this point, Chaos Daemons of Khorne are going to concede the game to Tzeentch, since they only have 3 models left, one of which is a Bloodthirster with 1 wound. There's a Skull Cannon with 2 wounds left, and then 1 fully healthy Skull Cannon. However, next turn, most likely, that Soul Grinder is going to charge and kill off that Skull Cannon, or at least engage in combat. But at this point, Khorne is very close to being tabled, and so at this point it would be beneficial to concede the game. And so we have a Tzeentch major victory with a final score of 9 victory points versus 2. And so now at the end of the game, now that it's been announced that Tzeentch has a win over the Chaos Daemons of Khorne thanks to a concession, with a final victory point score of 9 versus 2. Like I mentioned, at the end of the Chaos Demons turn, Chaos Daemons of Khorne are very, very close to being tabled, and at this point it would not be worth it to continue the game, as it would only be more of a runaway for Tzeentch. As I mentioned, it would be impossible for Khorne to achieve any of the 3 tactical objective cards that they drew, and therefore they would not gain any more victory points this turn unless somehow the Skull Cannon in combat with Kairos Fateweaver was somehow able to kill off Kairos Fateweaver, but I have very little faith in a Skull Cannon being able to kill off Kairos Fateweaver within 1 round of combat, especially since Kairos still has 5 wounds left. The likelihood of that happening is very small, considering the fact that, and actually it would be completely impossible for the Skull Cannon to kill off Kairos this turn, since he was not charged and did not charge, meaning he'd only have 2 attacks base, and so even if they did double damage, Kairos would still have 1 wound left at the end of the turn, and I would place more faith in Kairos being able to finish off that Skull Cannon, since the Skull Cannon only has 2 wounds left, and a single wound from Kairos Fateweaver can do d6 damage. And even if he doesn't finish off the Skull Cannon in the next Tzeentch turn, he could simply fall back and smite it to death, and Bolt of Change it to death, and the other Lord of Change could come up and smite as well, and so that Skull Cannon is dead, and Kairos Fateweaver is pretty much guaranteed to survive at this point. Which of course means that Chaos Daemons of Khorne would not be able to achieve Slay the Warlord. Also, somehow I doubt that the Bloodthirster, the final Bloodthirster on the table with 1 wound left, can pass a 3rd fight phase without taking 1 damage. That's pretty miraculous that the 2 previous fight phases he passed every single invuln in order to stay alive, but somehow I doubt that he could do it for a 3rd time. And that of course leaves the final Skull Cannon, which then has a couple choices to make. It could obviously shoot the Soul Grinder, but I don't think it would kill off the Soul Grinder. I suppose the 1 Skull Cannon that's in combat with Kairos could fall back, and then the Skull Cannon that did not move could shoot through a window and try to finish off Kairos, but once again, somehow I don't think that's going to happen. And so at this point, Khorne is not going to get any new victory points, and it would be very likely that they would be tabled in the following turn. So either this turn or the following turn. Well, I guess not this turn, because the Skull Cannon's not in combat. The 1 healthy Skull Cannon's not in combat with anyone, but most likely in Tzeentch turn 4, Khorne would be tabled, and so at this point, might as well end the game before Tzeentch gets any more victory points. So I thought it was a really interesting battle report. Tzeentch did much better this game than they did the previous game. Khorne did much worse this game, but partially because Tzeentch managed their models a lot better. Magnus did not die in Tzeentch turn 1, so that always helps. So overall, I thought it was pretty good. I thought Tzeentch did get lucky with their tactical objective cards that they drew right away, which always helps. But overall, I thought it was a good game. I thought it was an interesting game to play. I hope you thought it was an interesting interesting game to watch. I really hope you enjoyed it, and stay tuned for the next one.